What's happening? Thanks for joining me on this hump day. It is very much appreciated. Before we get started, because we have some breaking news at the top of the podcast today, I want to remind you a new era of this podcast begins on Monday. This Monday, March 3rd. A new era for this pod begins. We'll have more details on that for all of you on Friday. All right, let's get to some breaking news. Ian Rappaport, literally 5 minutes ago, tweeted out that the Patriots have given permission to Devon Godchaux to seek a trade. So Godchaux has been given permission to seek a trade by the Patriots. A few thoughts on this. Number one, this tells us, along with Rappaport's tweet, this tells us that the Patriots defense is going to change. Mike Vrabel, Terrell Williams, they run their defense differently. I've talked about even man fronts, right? 4-man fronts. That's what Vrabel and Williams do. I've talked about the aggressiveness with this new scheme. The fact that Vrabel and Williams don't mind their defensive ends getting a pass rush, being aggressive, getting downfield, not as worried about containing the edge and slowing the run game. This is going to be an aggressive defense. And to go along with that, on the interior of the defensive line, Vrabel and Williams are not necessarily worried about two-gapping, taking on double teams, being stout against the run. They like their interior defensive linemen to have some pass rush juice. Look at Jeffrey Simmons down in Tennessee. Perfect example. Jeffrey Simmons is a much different player than Godchaux, and not just because of the talent level. Simmons is obviously more talented, but the way Godchaux plays the interior defensive line is completely different than Simmons. Simmons is a guy who tries to impact every play, tries to get after the quarterback, tries to force the rush inside the middle of that offensive line. This is going to be a very aggressive, very physical, and as Terrell Williams says, a very violent defensive line. Godchaux's not a fit. He's not a fit with the scheme. He's not a fit with the approach. I'm not surprised whatsoever that Godchaux is one of the first names that we hear from the team that has been seen as a core guy, because he has been a core guy over the past couple of years. He's really the first core guy that the Patriots have told, hey, look, you're not part of the future. Time to move forward with somebody else. We're going to play this differently. We're going to scheme this differently. So move on. Now, Godchaux's contract has a potential out after this upcoming season. I don't know how much value he has. As far as what he does, he's still pretty damn good at what he does. So you might be able to, and I stress the word might, you might be able to get a third-day pick, right? You might get that day 3 pick, either a 5th, 6th, or 7th. I don't think Godchaux is going to bring back a ton for you. When you look at the draft, this is another reason why this makes sense for the Patriots. The draft is deep at defensive tackle and defensive line. We've talked about it, right? So if the Patriots, for example, if they feel like Keon White is better on the interior of the defensive line and they want to beef him up, they want to fatten him up a little bit, and they feel like he can move to the inside of the defensive line more with this system than the last system, then you look at the edge position in the draft and you say to yourself, the end position is loaded. We talked about it, I think, on Monday, if not Monday, late last week. So the defensive tackle position has just a crazy amount of depth, which on one hand, that helps the Patriots, because if you move on from Godchaux like they want to, you replace him with a free agent or maybe somebody in the draft, and you know there's a lot of numbers on your side. But if you're trying to get a good return for Godchaux, that's not necessarily great, because all these other teams across the NFL will say, why do I want to trade an asset to you for Godchaux when there's a ton of defensive tackle prospects in this draft, and I don't think we have to spend what you want for us to bring somebody in like that to our program. But the Patriots know there's a lot of depth on the defensive line in this draft. Eliot Wolf talked about it earlier today. I've talked about it a couple of times. And also, one last thing on Godchaux, he is through and through a Gerard Mayo guy, right? I remember last year talking about this in camp. when Godchaux was trying to get a new contract. He and Mayo was, they were messing around right there in front for everybody to see while Drew Rosenhaus was trying to hammer out this new deal for Godchaux. Looked like Mayo and Godchaux were pretty damn close. Godchaux, of course, had Mayo on his podcast before the season kicked off last year. So he's close with Mayo. He's not a scheme fit. Patriots going to move on. Of course, if you move him, that would also create some additional cap space, which is also something to think about. So that's the breaking news at the top. Godchaux has been given permission by the Patriots to seek a trade. We've got two more important Patriots-centric updates to get to. One of them also has to do with the defensive line. But before I get to those updates and before I get to what Wolf and Vrabel had to say over the last 24-plus hours, don't forget to help a brother out. Build this community one step at a time. That's how we do it. The way we attack the algorithm here at YouTube. And you can help us and you can help the algorithm drive the product to other people by doing a couple of things. Click that thumbs up. More likes means more eyeballs. Helps us. Also throw a comment in, as Mr. Snoopy did, saying they'll be lucky if they get a 7th-round pick for Godchaux. I would tend to agree with that. Maybe you get really lucky and get a 6th, but you throw a comment in. Likes and comments help us with the algorithm. More likes, more comments, and YouTube sees that. They throw it to other people who might not be aware of the product. So don't forget to like, don't forget to comment, and don't forget to subscribe. I see a couple of super chats. I want to get to those in a couple of minutes. But first, two more tidbits about the Patriots here. What's going on with Christian Barmore? We just talked about Godchaux getting permission to seek a trade. Well, what's up with Barmore, the other guy in the middle of the defensive line? Mike Vrabel said this to Karen Gregian of Mass Live. Quote, I would say that it's too soon to tell. There will be a checkup for where he's at medically as we move closer to April, but he seems to have the energy and the attitude that would be exciting to work with. Here's what Wolf had to say about Barmore today. We don't know for sure yet. He's working out in Tampa right now. Things are going very well. He's doing everything in his power. He wants to play football. He's passionate about getting back on the field. So, not a whole ton of detail. The most important detail between what Vrabel and Wolf said about Barmore is Vrabel telling us that Barmore is set to have a medical check as we get closer to April, which is obviously very important because as you get closer to April, you get closer to the draft. And I'm sure the Patriots would love to know where Barmore is health-wise before they get to the draft in case they have to draft a couple of defensive linemen in the middle. If you trade Godchaux or he walks, right, you release him, whatever happens with him, you're moving on. So you can bring somebody else in via the draft. If Barmore, if you get the medical records, if you get the medical check on Barmore and they say he's not quite ready to be back or he might never come back, that might change how you approach the draft. Now you've got Jaquelin Roy, who I thought played well last year. We'll see if he's a better fit for Vrabel and Williams. You've got a couple of depth pieces. Jeremiah Farms has obviously been re-signed. So you've got Farms, you've got Roy, and hopefully you have Barmore. But the medical checkup close to April is going to be huge for Barmore and the Patriots. Where's he at physically? Because Barmore, unlike Godchaux, Barmore feels like he is the best fit for Vrabel and Williams defense. We talk about somebody who's athletic, who is powerful and can get to the quarterback, somebody who creates pressure in the middle of the line. That's Barmore. I think Barmore is a fantastic fit for Mike Vrabel and Terrell Williams and what they want to do defensively. So if Barmore is healthy, I think he's going to have a gigantic impact on this defense, even more of an impact as he had going back a couple of years ago, because the scheme fits him better than Belichick's scheme fits him. And Covington's scheme was pretty much Belichick's scheme. Barmore, aggressive, penetrate the interior of that offensive line, play physical, play violent, etc., etc., etc. Without Barmore, you have another huge piece that you need on this roster, and you're going to lose that big-time impact. Speaking of pass rush, Speaking of impact, Harold Landry has been given permission to seek a trade from the Tennessee Titans. This is interesting. First of all, Landry last year was pretty good. 71 tackles, 9 sacks, 18 pressures. From 2022 to 2024, he's had over 30 sacks, 31 and a half sacks. He is that prototypical defensive end / outside linebacker that pins his ears back and can get to the quarterback. And that is precisely what Vrabel and Williams want. Therefore, it's not a shock that he's a Vrabel guy. Vrabel was there in 2018 when Harold Landry was drafted from Boston College in 2018. Landry is a Vrabel guy through and through. So I would absolutely anticipate the Patriots having some level of interest in Harold Landry, not just because he fits a major need for this team, but also because of the relationship that he has with both Williams and Vrabel. Now, of course, you wonder if the Titans are saying, yes, Harold, you can move on. You can seek permission or get permission from us to be traded and try to find a team that's interested in you. It does make you wonder if Tennessee is eyeing Abdul Carter with the number 1 overall pick. I don't think they're that far along yet, but maybe they are. Maybe Tennessee looks at it and says, no, we're going to draft Carter, so we really don't need Landry. He's making this money. We can get an asset for him. He had 9 sacks last year. He's only 28 years old. So maybe Tennessee already is showing their hand a little bit with this Landry permission. And maybe they're showing us that they're leaning towards drafting Abdul Carter, which would make sense. He is seen as the best player in this draft by many. Landry has 2 years left on his deal, $24 million cap hit each year. As I just said, he's 28, so you would think he still has at least 2, 3, maybe even 4 good years left in him. I don't think it would cost a ton to trade for Landry because, A, as we've talked about, this draft class is very deep with defensive end, edge, outside linebacker, pass rush kind of guys, right? So I don't think it'll cost you a ton to trade for Landry. You also look at free agency. There's a number of edges and outside linebackers in free agency. So I think that will suppress the Harold Landry market, which is good news for the Patriots because I think you could get Landry with a day 3 pick if you really wanted Landry on your football team. So keep an eye out for Harold Landry. I would 100% pick up the phone and talk to Tennessee. I would first wonder if you can restructure that contract, and then I would wonder what the price is. All right, we're going to get to Vrabel and Eliot Wolf, what they had to say the past 24-plus hours in Indianapolis. But before we do that, let's hit a few Super Chats. Anonymous with the $10 Super Chat. Wolf has final say, question mark, question mark, question mark, emoji. We will get to that. We will get to what Eliot Wolf said as far as having final say. We will get to how people are freaking out about it. I will just say this up front. I would not freak out about it. Take a breath, relax. I would not be freaking out about Eliot Wolf having final say in what he said to the media earlier today. I'm going to get into why in a couple of minutes, but that's my first thought. Don't freak out. Take a deep breath. Vitalix jumps in with a $10 super chat. Sigh, Eliot. I only hope this isn't like already some kind of disconnect or power struggle within the building with us assuming Vrabel had final say yesterday. Bye, Devon. Thanks, Nick. Again, I will have the same advice for you, Vitalix, as I had for Anonymous. Take a deep breath. Relax a little bit. I know people saw this from Eliot Wolf. I know some of you have seen this on Twitter. And I know your minds start to wander and you start to get really, really concerned about Eliot Wolf having the hammer and dropping the hammer. I would take a deep breath. We'll get into it in a minute. Casey Reed, thoughts on Steve Smith's take on Jalen Pokin, the wide receivers coach last year. Casey, I've talked about the coaching staff. I do think the coaching staff, especially Hughes in the wide receiver room, impacted the young wide receivers negatively. I don't think he is seen across the league as somebody to be taken ultra seriously. I've heard he's a great guy. I'm sure he's a great guy. but he went back to college to be an offensive analyst in Alabama for Kalen DeBoer, who was the guy who he was also kind of an analyst at Washington before he was hired last year to come here as the Patriots wide receivers coach. He had a connection. Hughes had a connection with Gerard Mayo. I don't think he was the right guy for the job. I think the fact that the NFL had no interest in Hughes tells us that he was not the right guy for the job. And so I do think he impacted Jalen Polk at least a little bit. A little bit. Do I think Steve Smith was a little too nice to Jalen Polk's rookie season? I do. I don't think you can write everything off due to coaching. I don't think that whatsoever. So I think Smith, he's been a Polk guy. He remains a Polk guy. But I do think he went a little nice. Went a little nice towards Jalen Polk with what he had to say. I do think some of, if not most of, the issues last year with Polk had to do with Polk. Now, some of it was outside of his control, which we will get to a little bit later because Eliot Wolf had something very interesting to say about Jalen Polk today. All right, last super chat before we get to Vrabel and Wolf. Shout out to my younger brother, Colson, that I got listening to the pod now, LOL. Shout out, Colson. Glad that you are part of the family, the community. Tell your friends, right? Tell your family. I would say tell your family, but Justin TF Patriot is all over it. He's already telling his family. Tell your fellow Patriots fans, welcome aboard, Colson. Always love people joining the family, the community. And Justin, thank you for spreading the word, and thank you for the super chat. It is very much appreciated. Okay. Let's get into Vrabel and Wolf. And let's start where all of you want to start, judging by the super chats. Everybody wants to talk about who's got the hammer, who's dropping the hammer, what is the power structure. And Vrabel and Wolf both had a lot to say the past 24 hours. They both had a lot to say. Let's start with Vrabel. When he was asked about final say on the roster, he said, quote, well, I wouldn't be here and I wouldn't have wanted to be the head coach here if I wasn't comfortable in my impact on the roster. So we want to continue to have great conversations with the personnel staff, with me, with Stretch, with coaching. Wolf today, when asked about the final say, and this was like the third or fourth question he faced about the final say and the power structure. And I think it was Phil Perry who really did a great job of trying to get Eliot to say who had final say, and it worked. Because Eliot Wolf said, quote, ultimately, it's my final say. Again, Mike wouldn't have taken his job if he weren't comfortable with each other. Not going to be Eliot guys. There's not going to be Eliot guys. There's not going to be Mike guys, okay? Earlier in the press conference, Wolf said that listening to Coach Vrabel, there's not a lot of GMs or people in my position that are going to force players on the coaching staff. Certainly the best decisions are made together. Okay. Everybody take a deep breath, because I know the initial reaction is, oh my God, Eliot Wolf said he has final say on this roster. This is going to suck. He sucked last year. This is all terrible, et cetera, et cetera. Let me translate. This is my opinion. Let me translate to you what Vrabel and Wolf actually said and why they might have said it. Let's start here. Eliot Wolf said today, I'm not going to force players on Mike Vrabel. Mike Vrabel has to okay everything. Eliot Wolf is not going to make a unilateral decision. He's not going to make a decision with full autonomy. He's not going to go over the top of Mike Vrabel and pick a player that Vrabel does not want. Wolf said it himself. I'm not going to force a player on Mike Vrabel. So Mike Vrabel inevitably has the final word, because if Eliot Wolf is not going to force anybody on Mike Vrabel, that means if Mike Vrabel doesn't like somebody, Eliot Wolf might love the guy, and Vrabel will say, I don't want him. I don't think he's going to work here. And as soon as Vrabel says that, the conversation is over. I've said this from day one. Eliot Wolf is not going to force anything upon Mike Vrabel and Ryan Cowden. It's just not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. Eliot Wolf understands that he's not going to usurp the head coach in what the head coach wants. Mike Vrabel has defined who he wants as a football player at each position on the field. Eliot Wolf takes that definition along with the scouting staff, and they do their homework and they watch the film, and then Mike Vrabel will be told who fits his criteria. And from that point moving forward, Vrabel inevitably has the hammer because Wolf is not going to do anything on his own. He's not going to tell Mike Vrabel, sorry, Mike, you don't like that player. I love him. We're drafting him. It's not going to work. Vrabel has to give him the thumbs up. Vrabel has more power than Gerard Mayo ever had because Vrabel had all of the leverage. We've been through this before. Vrabel had all the leverage when he spoke to the Patriots. He didn't have to come here. Vrabel said it himself yesterday. He would not have signed a contract with the Patriots if he was not comfortable in his role within the personnel. He's not going to take a gig just to take a gig. So take a deep breath. Understand that Mike Vrabel had all of the leverage. Understand that Eliot Wolf still admitted multiple times today that he's not going to override Mike Vrabel. He's not going to choose somebody that Mike Vrabel doesn't want. It's just not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. Mike Vrabel was not going to sign with the Patriots unless this opportunity was perfect for him. Mike Vrabel is going to have the say in personnel because he is the coach. He defines the philosophy. He defines the program. He defines the profile of each player that he wants on this football team. And he is the alpha in the room. Eliot Wolf is not going to kick Mike Vrabel's feet off the desk and say, we're drafting this dude with the 4th pick, and now you have to deal with it, coach. It's just not going to happen, folks. It's not going to happen. In no reality would that happen. So people will say, well, Nick, why did Wolf say that he ultimately has final say? And why was Mike Vrabel so vague? I've heard people ask this question. I've seen it on TV. I'm sure they've been talking about it on the radio. I don't listen to radio often, quite frankly. I'm sure they've been talking about it on the radio. I know they've been talking about it on NBC Sports Boston. Why was Vrabel vague yesterday? Why did Vrabel not say he had final say? Why does Eliot Wolf say he ultimately has final say? Why? What's going on here? I've said this from the beginning of the offseason, and I will remind all of you to a very important detail. Eliot Wolf is listed. Eliot Wolf is listed as the final say for the Patriots. That is very important. When we went through all of the Mayo stuff last year, and we went through who was going to have the final say on personnel, right? There goes Belichick. Who's going to be the guy? It was Belichick before, obviously, for 20 plus years. Who's going to have the final say? Because you have to let the NFL know who is going to have the final say. There's a term for it. I don't remember the term, but there's an executive that you have to anoint as the guy. Right now with the NFL, Eliot Wolf is known as that guy. Eliot Wolf is known as the final say in New England, okay? That was made last year. That happened last year. Wolf became the guy. If you want to have somebody have the final say over the top of Eliot Wolf, you have to let the NFL know that, and you have to file that pretty much with the league. Now, once you file that with the league, you have to open up the process. So for the Patriots, if they wanted to put Mike Vrabel over the top of Eliot Wolf or Ryan Cowden over the top of Eliot Wolf, they would have to go through a process. They would have to talk to other GM candidates. They would have to bring people from the outside. They would have to satisfy the Rooney Rule. By having Eliot Wolf in that same position and having Eliot Wolf come out and say publicly, I have the final say, the Patriots don't have to go through all of that red tape. And what have we learned from the Patriots over the past couple of years? Whether you like it or I like it, it doesn't matter. The Patriots do not enjoy a thorough process. I've had an issue with it. I had an issue with it with the Mayo stuff. I even had an issue with it this year and said they should have talked to a few more people. Vrabel was ultimately the guy and should have been the guy, but I wanted a little bit more of a thorough process in that week. I thought they could have talked to a couple of more candidates. But the Crafts, the Patriots, they don't want to get bogged down by the process. So the most efficient, easiest way to deal with this was to keep Wolf on the paperwork, have Wolf be the face of the final say, bring Mike Vrabel in as the head coach with an understanding between Vrabel and Wolf who would have the power, and then Vrabel brings his guy in, Ryan Cowden, within like the first 24 hours he's here. Nothing that's been said over the past 24 plus hours changes my mind as to how this organization is going to be run. Mike Vrabel has to okay everything. He's got to have the okay on any player that's brought in or by draft or free agency or trade or whatever. Vrabel is going to be the guy that decides it. Ryan Cowden was brought in to be his right-hand man. And there's no way on God's green earth, no matter who says what they say, there's no way on God's green earth that Eliot Wolf is going to overrule Mike Vrabel and Ryan Cowden. It is not going to happen. This is all a shell game, folks. That's what I think. This is all a shell game. This is to keep Wolf's name as the executive within the NFL, representing the Patriots. Meanwhile, opening the door for Vrabel to come in with Cowden, ultimately really have say in that room without having to go through the process, without having to go through a dog and pony show, which is how I'm sure the Crafts look at it. That's what I think is going on. That's what I believe. Some of you might disagree. Some of you might say, well, there's no way. It's not happening. Eliot Wolf has to say. You can believe Eliot Wolf. I'm just telling you. What I think is going on is this is all optics. The Patriots don't want to go through a hiring process in the front office. They went through some of that last year. They don't want to do it again. They have the people where they want the people. They've got Vrabel. They've got Cowden. They've got Wolf. They've got Alonzo Highsmith. They've got Cam Williams. They don't want to open this thing up. They wanted to move quickly because last year they were bogged down by the coaching staff, and it took forever to get the coaching staff together, and that didn't allow Wolf to go to the Senior Bowl and do other things. So I think, as Mr. Snoopy says, it's just smoke and mirrors. That's what I think. That's my opinion. And I think they told you that if you read the tea leaves. When Wolf said that he's not going to overrule Vrabel, that tells us that, right? There's not a lot of GMs or people in my position that are going to force players on the coaching staff. Said Mike wouldn't take this job if we weren't comfortable with each other. So that's what I think is happening. That's how I feel about it. All right, moving on. Don't forget to like, don't forget to comment, don't forget to subscribe. What about the Patriots' free agency approach? Here's what Vrabel had to say about their approach. Hopefully aggressive. We want to be aggressive. I'm confident we'll be aggressive. So hopefully I'm confident. There's going to be this high level where things are going to get done very quickly. That will then transition to some mid-range dollars. Then you look at opportunity. We're in a position to offer both. Vrabel continued. He was asked about paying a free agent above their market. He used a car analogy. I love a good car analogy. I used car analogy last year during the offseason, right? The car lot, how many of the same cars are on the lot? How much are you willing to pay for that car if there are others like the car on the lot? Here's what Vrabel said. I like to shop like everybody else. When you go and there's only one of a certain car, maybe you have to pay more for that car because there's one of them. When you like 3 or 4 players in a certain role, you may not have to overspend. Everyone overspends sometimes in free agency. So it's the same analogy I used last year when Kyle Duggar in the safety market. There were a lot of safeties on the market. That's why I thought the Patriots overpaid Duggar last offseason. I thought it was an overpay because there were guys that were on the car lot that could do very similar things as to Duggar that did not make as much money, didn't cost you as much money as Duggar did. So it's the same analogy I used. If there's a unique car, if there's a T. Higgins, right? There's only one T. Higgins on the car lot this offseason if T. Higgins hits free agency. There's only one Higgins. So you might have to spend more money on T. Higgins because he is that unique car that is on the lot. Here's what Eliot Wolf had to say about spending to the cap. I just think we're going to do what we have to do. I think it's probably not responsible to spend the whole thing, but that's not to say that we won't do it if there are players out there that can help us. So again, I'll translate. The Patriots intend to spend. Both Wolf and Vrabel have said on the record, we intend to spend. The intention is to spend. They're going to spend money. I've talked about this before. They have to spend money. Greg Bedard wrote a great article about this on BSJ over the last few days. They have to spend 90% of the cash spending or whatever it is. Greg has pretty much said that the Patriots will spend about $100 million in his estimation this offseason. They've got to spend money. It's an NFL rule. We talked about it last year. They kicked some of last year's money to this year. The 3-year period is 24, 25, 26. The cap is going to go up again next year. So they have to spend money, and they don't have anybody. Unfortunately, they don't have anybody on the roster right now that they need to retain and pay a lot of money to. So they're going to spend. They intend to spend, and they have to spend. They will spend. Now, spending takes different forms, and this is what Vrabel and Wolf are talking about, right? When people think of spending, they think, oh, well, the Patriots are going to go out and they're going to spend on, Zach Bond, and they'll go out and they'll get Ronnie Stanley, and they'll go out and they'll get T. Higgins if he's available, et cetera, et cetera. No, I don't think the Patriots are going to go out there and spend huge money on 3 or 4 splashy guys. I don't think that's what they're going to do. Spending takes different forms. I believe I said this on Monday. I'll stand by it today. I think they will try to sign 1 to 2 of the upper class, whether it's Ronnie Stanley or it's Alaric Jackson or it's Zach Bond or it's T. Higgins. I think you look at that list of the top 10 to 12 guys on the market, and the Patriots, I think, will at least attempt to sign 1 or 2 of those guys. And then I think the vast majority of the money that's going to be spent is going to be meat and potatoes, that middle class. And so there's different forms of spending. You're going to spend, I think, big money on a couple of guys, and then you're going to attack that middle class because you have so many holes on your roster. You have to do what Washington did last year. Washington attacked the middle class. They didn't go out and spend huge amount of money on the biggest names in free agency. They spent most of their money on that middle class, and they were able to hit on 6, 7, 8, 9 guys. So that's what I think the Patriots will do. I think they will inevitably sign 1 or 2 names to bigger contracts, and then I think they'll do most of their shopping at that middle tier. And I think what Wolf is saying is overpaying is one thing, but being egregiously, irresponsible is an entirely another thing. They're willing to overspend, but they're not going to go out there and pay T. Higgins like $45 million a year. I think that's the point. All right, moving on. Wolf, I thought he voiced plenty of regret about last year and how things went last year. His opening statement. Wolf said in his opening statement, last season, ultimately the roster was on me. We were 4-13, just didn't get enough done. The free agency class did not live up to expectations. The draft class, it's too soon to tell, but we were expecting more from those guys. Just didn't do enough to improve the roster to get it to where we needed it to be. Now, this doesn't change anything. Wolf was still bad last offseason overall. He still got a failing grade from us. We all agree that Wolf did not do enough. We all agree that it was a failure. We all agree on that. I understand nothing he says today is going to change what he did last year, and it shouldn't change what he did last year because he wasn't good enough last year. And I understand that most people won't even care what Eliot Wolf said. But I will say this. It was the right thing to say by Wolf today. That was exactly what he should have said. That's precisely what he should have said. The roster's on me. We were 4-13. We did not do enough. We didn't do enough in free agency, and the guys that I drafted, we thought they were going to, they were going to give us more than they did. And so I will say at least Eliot Wolf, the first time he has spoken since August, at least he took accountability. He took responsibility and said, this is on me. Wolf on last year's free agency, this was interesting. He said, I think maybe just being more thorough about what he would have changed. I think some of the information we got on some of the players wasn't as thorough as it needed to be. Two guys I thought of immediately, Godchaux Out, KJ Osborne, right? Examples 1 and 2. Free agents that you brought in. They were supposed to bring some kind of stability. Chooks was gone by, what was it, week 2? KJ Osborne was supposed to be a settling guy in that wide receiver room, a veteran mentor, and he was pretty much out within the first month of the year. So Wolf says that, he thinks some of the information they got on some of the players wasn't as thorough as it needed to be. So they failed. They failed to do enough homework. And this is a question I've had, right? When Chooks walked away, I asked a question, was there anything that anybody would have, should have, could have known about Chooks and what makes him tick and not tick? And maybe if you did more homework and you got the answers from somebody, you would not have gone out and signed Godchaux Out. So it's a bad job. It's a bad job by Wolf. It's a bad job by the front office. Wolf is admitting we didn't do enough legwork, which is embarrassing. It's embarrassing. Now, I can sit here and tell you that Wolf was impacted by Mayo because of the staff. The staff last year wasn't announced until February 19th. This year, the staff was announced on February 5th. So that's 2 full weeks of preparation and stuff that you could have as a front office and a coaching staff when you get it done earlier. So, yes, that impacted Eliot Wolf, but there's absolutely zero excuse for this. And I'm borderline surprised he even said it, but he did say it. And everything about last year's process and structure, it felt doomed from the start when you look back at how things unfolded. Something else Wolf said that was fascinating, a little bit of regret here. In the dark night, talking about Jalen Polk, Wolf said, in the dark night, the hero you need isn't the hero that you have. He's mature, he's smart. Organizationally, we maybe put too much on his plate early. That kind of stunted his growth a little bit. I would say it stunted his growth a bit. A little bit. I thought he'd at least have, 40 catches. A little bit. So that was an interesting comment that was made by Wolf regarding Eliot Wolf. And regarding Jalen Polk. And it took me back to what Josh McDaniels said with Julian Edelman on Games with Names. McDaniels was talking about developing the quarterback position. And the way that McDaniels described it was, it's like filling a cup. And you don't want to put too much into the cup at one time because you will overwhelm the young quarterback, and that will negatively impact that guy, and it won't do anything good for his development. And when I heard Eliot Wolf say that about Jalen Polk today, about putting too much on his plate too early, I thought about that McDaniels quote, that McDaniels comment with Julian, which is, to me, they filled Jalen Polk's cup up with way too much and put too much on him too early, and he kind of just imploded. And his confidence was gone, his mental was gone, and they just gave him too much responsibility. They anticipated him, to learn quickly and really be like the number one receiver for this football team. And Wolf thinks, and this might not mean anything at the end of the day, but Wolf thinks they overfilled Jalen Polk's cup. They gave him too much, too soon to be responsible for, and he pretty much had a mental meltdown. I mean, Wolf didn't say that, but that's what you take from it. They gave him too much, and he pretty much combusted. And he lost himself. And once the confidence was gone, and once like he was probably overthinking, and then all of a sudden now he's just a mess. Does it mean that Jalen Polk's going to be back here, in 2025 contributing? I don't know. I don't feel a lot of confidence in that, but I will say I'm not giving up on Jalen Polk just yet. I still think he can contribute. Now, maybe that's 35 catches, 40 catches, but I still think he could contribute, but he needs a mental reset. And so we'll see what Todd Downing and Josh McDaniels and those guys, what they can do. What they can do to try to, get the most out of him in his sophomore year. All right, I've got a couple of other notes, but first I see some super chats jumping in. Greg Fields, $10 super chat. Nick, I hear you, but the fan base cannot stand Wolf, and that is why you are hearing pushback. No, I get that. I get that, Greg. Look, the way I feel about Wolf, I think it's obvious that he failed last year, and I've said it a bunch of times. Do I think that people are a little crazy as far as Wolf goes after just one offseason? I do. I think, having one bad offseason doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to be a god-awful GM, can never do the job, and just forget about it. I do think there are some things that he did that actually worked. Now, the bad far outweighed the good. But I understand. Eliot Wolf is, Mayo's gone. Wolf's going to take all the darts to the face. I get it. I've said Wolf failed. I would have replaced Wolf, which I think the Patriots have done without saying that they've done it, with Cowden and Vrabel. So I totally get it. But I do think there is some hyperbole, based off of just one offseason. The fact is, there are really no GMs that get one offseason to fix what Wolf was put in charge to fix. And I know some people might say, oh, well, Gerard Mayo, everybody was quick to say goodbye to Mayo. Mayo had a week-by-week chance to figure things out. Mayo had a weekly opportunity to get better at what he was doing. Eric DeCosta said this with Todd McShay. As the GM, the worst feeling in the world is like when things aren't working during the season, because there's really not much you can do about it. Eric DeCosta says, like, you're being held hostage during the season. You have a finite amount of time to do your job, and you've got to do it right. And if you don't get it right, the year's going to be a mess. And that's what happened. Eliot Wolf didn't get it right. He unequivocally failed. He deserves a ton of criticism. But I do think some of the stuff is like, I think people underestimate how much he had to deal with as far as turning over the roster, this coaching staff. He had to hold Gerard Mayo's hand to a point, filling out the staff. It put him behind the eight ball. So I do think there were things that made it tougher, but he failed. But do I think like there are some people that are a bit overboard? Yes, but that's kind of the nature of the thing, right? So it is what it is. I would not be worried about Eliot Wolf. Terry, looking forward to hearing about the new era of the Nick Cattles podcast on Friday. Thank you, Terry. Terry, you're a Patreon member, so you're going to hear about the new era before Friday. Patreon members will get a full rundown as to what we're doing starting on Monday, March 3rd. But Friday, we will have the details for everybody. Thank you, Terry, for the $20 super chat. All right. Let's get to wide receiver one. This is the last thing I want to talk about today. Both Vrabel and Eliot Wolf were asked about trying to acquire a number one receiver. Mark Daniels transcribed this about Vrabel. Quote, one, it's hard to find. You usually have to draft them. But then sometimes, based on circumstances available for trade, I think we'll explore every opportunity that we can. There's only so many options in free agency and in trade and the draft. we will explore all three of those. Vrabel then said, if we find a number one receiver, they're not just walking around here. Let me know if they are. We'll get them, but we're going to do everything that we can, unquote. Eliot Wolf, talking about finding a top receiver, said, doing what's necessary. We're doing what's necessary. We need to improve the roster, whether that means aggression or having a plan or being able to pivot. And then this part about wide receiver one and pivoting from Wolf, I thought was very important. He said, just being able to pivot when something doesn't go as expected. Just being able to pivot when something doesn't go as expected. What I wonder, does Eliot Wolf look at last offseason, and does he feel like he and the Patriots front office were maybe too locked in on one or two receivers? And because they were so locked in on those guys, they might have left other opportunities on the table. And by the time they circled back, it was too late. So, for example, does Eliot Wolf feel like they got too locked in on Calvin Ridley during free agency? And when Calvin Ridley decided to go to Tennessee, Wolf, the front office, they weren't necessarily ready to pivot quick enough, because he said just being able to pivot when something doesn't go as expected. Did they expect Calvin Ridley to be a Patriot? And then when Ridley said, no, I'm going to Tennessee, the Patriots did not pivot like they should have. And I wonder about Brandon Ayuk. Were the Patriots so locked in? Were the Patriots so locked in on trading for Brandon Ayuk that when the Ayuk thing didn't work, they were stuck, right? Maybe they regret not, trying to wrap the Ayuk thing up earlier and then pivoting to somebody else. So I found that comment from Wolf fascinating about, being able to pivot when something doesn't go as expected. And this was in the context of a wide receiver. So does he think they were too locked in on Ridley and Ayuk? And does he think that hurt their chances of going out and pivoting and finding somebody else? Maybe he could have gone and, traded for Keenan Allen or Amari Cooper, or I don't know, not to say that those guys are great. Neither guy had a great year, but better than nothing. But both Vrabel and Wolf sound committed to turning over every single stone to try to find a wide receiver, whether that's Higgins or Godwin in free agency, or Higgins via a trade if he does get tagged, whether that's trying to trade for DK Metcalf, whether that's trying to throw a dart during the draft. They sound like they're both on the same page here, and that they're going to try to do everything they possibly can to get that wide receiver one. And that goes into part of like my Wolf stuff, because I know some people might look at what I said about Wolf a couple of minutes ago and they're like, oh my God, you're excusing him. Even though I said multiple times he failed, he was a failure, it was a bad offseason. It kind of goes in line with my thinking regarding Wolf, which is Wolf was aggressive last year, right? He just didn't close the deal. He was aggressive on Calvin Ridley, didn't spend enough on Ridley, drew the line and said, I'm done, right? He was very aggressive on Ayuk. The Patriots had a trade lined up, and they were going to give Ayuk the most money that anybody was willing to give him. So even though Wolf and Vrabel say we're going to be aggressive and we're going to try to do everything that we can to go out and get that wide receiver one, last offseason should remind us that ultimately the player makes the choice. Bastion says, do we even think Wolf has what it takes to close a deal? I don't know if we know that, right? I don't know. There's nothing from last offseason. I'm trying to jog my memory. Obviously, they retained a lot of guys. The Matthew Judon trade, but Yeah, until it's done. But this goes back. Look, this goes back to the conversation about what's really happening in that front office. Like, what happens this offseason, Mike Vrabel is going to have a huge say. Ryan Cowden is going to have a huge say. So, I mean, we can look at it any way we want. Wolf certainly tried to close the deal with Brandon Ayuk, and Ayuk said thanks, but no thanks. So, it wasn't good. It wasn't good. Chris Chapman says, good show today, Nick. Glad I could catch it live. Thank you for the $10 super chat, Chris. I appreciate you. I know we're going a little bit long today, but there was a lot to cover given the Godchaux news and the Christian Barmore update and the Harold Landry stuff. We finally got into the Wolf Vrabel press conferences a little bit deeper into the pod. Again, I want to make sure, Craig says, on 98.5, they would say Nick loves Wolf. Yes, they would. They would, because they would take the one thing I said that didn't absolutely eviscerate Wolf and say, you're defending him. I think when we grade people and we look at things, we have to be realistic and we have to understand the circumstances. And, you can try to do certain things, but there were a lot of reasons why they didn't do well in free agency last year. And a lot of that was Eliot. Some of it was out of their control. And obviously the draft is, it was, looking at after the first season, it was bad. It was bad. But if, again, this is a huge hypothetical, if Jalen Polk ends up being able to contribute this year, are people as upset about the draft from 2024? I don't think so. Because it's always about, Polk versus McConkey, right? McConkey. And I get it. Totally get it. But, McConkey's size was a big question. What if McConkey gets hurt 3 times this year and then all of a sudden his NFL career just changes the trajectory completely changes? And what if Jalen Polk actually, again, I wouldn't bet on this, but what if Jalen Polk catches 35, 40 footballs, 45 footballs? What if that evens out a little bit more in 2025? So right now, yes, we can sit here and we can say, man, it was awful. But in reality, when you look at it, Drake May, obviously everybody's happy with Drake May. And I hate doing this. But, I see my guy Amstel jumping in and people are going to sit there and try to say I painted Eliot Wolf in a certain way. Let's just look at this class, okay? I don't care. Let's say GMX drafted this class. And I've said this before and I'll say it again. I don't ever judge a draft class after one season. I don't. That's my own philosophy. It's my own principle. I don't do it. I wouldn't do it for any other team. I'm not doing it for the Patriots. I wouldn't do it for anybody. It's been one season. Now, right now, we can say last year's draft was obviously a miserable fail. But we also have to look at it where Drake May was your first pick, and then your second pick was Polk, obviously a disaster, a bust for his rookie season. Your third round pick was Caden Wallace, who broke his leg and missed most of the year. So the more likely scenario is that Jalen Polk never becomes the guy that anybody thought he was going to be that actually liked him coming out, right? And maybe Wallace never proves himself, whatever. But it's also possible, I don't think it's likely, but it's also possible that Jalen Polk comes back this year, has a little bit of a rebound, and contributes. And if Caden Wallace is healthy, maybe Caden Wallace proves himself to at least be a swing tackle. And I think people wouldn't be as harsh, right? But I get we judge it right now. And right now, it's an awful draft aside from Drake May and Joe Milton, if you love what Milton did. But like I said, I never judge a draft, and people can do what they want. I never judge a draft after 1 year. I just don't. I don't think it's fair to the players. So we'll see what happens. But again, I don't think it matters much regarding this year because I think it's smoke and mirrors. And I think Mike Vrabel is the guy who's going to say yes or no to bringing players in. Don't forget to like. Don't forget to comment. Don't forget to subscribe. If breaking news happens, we will be all over it. We're back on Friday to have the details as far as the new era of the podcast. But until Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern time, right here on YouTube, this has been the Nick Cattle Show. I appreciate every single one of you. Thanks to the people who like, who comment, who subscribe, and especially those who have sent super chats. See you.